I'm going to talk to you for about the next 40 minutes or so about three aspects of social. Why you need it, what it is, because I think there's a huge amount of confusion about what really is social collaboration. I think we confuse socialization, a lot of great chit-chat, getting to know somebody, which is all very important, don't get me wrong, but it's not the same as getting productive work done. And as Matt pointed out in the video overview before, we are talking about being more productive, being more efficient by adding social, not just adding more chit-chat. All right, so we're going to talk about what it really is. And then most importantly, I want to spend the bulk of my time talking about how to do it. Right? Because it doesn't just happen. A lot of us think it does because, you join Twitter, you join Facebook, you join LinkedIn, and communities are already up and running. And there's already great conversations going. And if you're lucky enough that your organization, your group is already that advanced, then yeah, maybe it is as easy as just getting people to join. But for most of us, right, it's more provide and pray at this point. We've put up the social site or the social capability in some cases, and nobody's showing up. So how do you get that engagement? And it's not just installing the right software, despite how wonderful I'm sure the Appian platform is. That's an enabler, but it takes more. It takes a cultural shift. And I love the fact that Matt said it's about the democratization of work, right? That's a kind of a scary concept for some of us, right? Command and control is the way we've normally done it, and now we're talking about really empowering the employee. So make sure before you jump feet first into this that you're culturally ready for this as well, and we'll talk about what that really means. There we go. So why do we need it? Well, clearly, we do have some challenges when it comes to improving processes, improving work, being more productive. This is some Gartner research from some of our surveys that we do. Sorry, it's a bit of an eye chart for those of you in the back. But the basic message is there when we surveyed our clients about what some of the top challenges making it more difficult to successfully enable process improvements, the two by far there at the top are organizational conflicts or politics. No surprise there. Culture change is hard. And of course, constantly changing business conditions. The idea that a process stays pretty static, pretty rigid, pretty uniform for years on end, that's history. It's constantly changing. And the pace of change demands that, especially people, be able to adapt to that change more quickly. So that's one of the reasons we're going to see more social as part of BPM. The other impediments there, you can see some of them, it's typically not a technology issue, nor executive buy-in. Those are fairly low on the list. So it's much more about getting people engaged and involved in making change happen. And that's really no surprise given how Gartner looks at BPM. This is our definition, which we've been using for several years. BPM treats processes as first-class assets, not as an afterthought to an application implementation. Processes become first-class. We make them first-class because they directly contribute to enterprise performance, right? And not just in terms of efficiency, but also effectiveness. And they drive organizational excellence and agility. That really boils down to three key principles or expectations. Better visibility into our products or processes, right? If we take processes first class, we don't get those gaps when we go between applications or between groups or functions or what have you. We get more end-to-end visibility. We get better accountability and traceability because we're empowering the right people with the right decision-making powers. And most importantly, and where I'm going to spend most of my time talking, because I think this is where social makes the most impact, although it makes impact across all three, it makes most impact across that agility, adaptability dimension. That is, if you want your process to be more agile, more adaptable, able to change more quickly, and bring the people along, or even have them driving the change, not even coming along, but they're the ones pushing for the change, then you really are talking about a more social approach to work. Now, another way of looking at why we need it is this way of analyzing the world of process. Gartner, like most analyst firms, we love those two-dimensional grids. So this is my two-dimensional grid for this morning's presentation. We've got at the bottom dimension all the way from highly structured, maybe straight through processes, up to unstructured, very ad hoc, make it up as you go along process. And then on the vertical dimension, you see there efficiency as the key concern versus more adaptability. We need to deal with changing circumstances in a more effective way. And of course, no surprise here, social BPM, designed by doing, as we sometimes characterize it, dominates when we're talking about more ad hoc and more adaptable processes. And certainly traditional BPM, with no social dimension whatsoever, is perfectly fine when you're talking about very, very structured, very efficiency-focused processes. But guess what? That dark blue part of the grid is shrinking in most of our organizations. The things that are tried and true and stay the same, and we're only looking at throughput, are rapidly diminishing. Even in concerns as straightforward as you'd think as mining, manufacturing, agriculture, and so on. Those too are becoming more volatile and more unstructured. So if anything, social BPM is now becoming a dominant need. Now, I won't say it's actually dominant in our organizations yet. It is still just getting off the ground. Actually, I'll do a show of hands. How many of you do feel that you've got a substantial social initiative underway already in your organizations? Show of hands here. We're looking at not even 10%, maybe 10%. And a lot of those hands are only halfway up, so I'm not even sure they were really half believing what they were saying. How about, you're looking at getting into social more. You're kind of kicking the tires on doing a more social approach to some of your processes. Hey, it's the same hands. Come on. Come on. All right. So I'll talk to you about some companies that are a little bit further ahead on the curve. And fortunately, as you saw in the agenda, you've got some companies presenting here that can talk about their experiences and some of the transformational benefits they've seen. Now, one last way of looking at this in terms of why social, why are we adding it to BPM? I'm struggling just to get BPM done. Why are you asking me to do this extra thing called social? As if I don't already have enough to do. It's really this take on the relationship. Now, as I mentioned up front, traditional BPM primarily focused on, or traditional process management. You go back to Taylorism and so on, even Six Sigma and some of those techniques. It was all about efficiency. Then with modern BPM, we started to say, well, that's great, efficiency is great, but these other attributes are becoming important too. The accountability I mentioned up front, visibility, and adaptability. Now when we look at social BPM, we're really saying take that adaptability component and really make that first class, a major concern. If you're going to do that, you got to do at least three things here. I like to call them the 3 E's: engagement, empowerment, and emergence, right? It's really putting some structure around how you get that adaptability, not just out of the IT systems. I think BPMS platforms do a great job of that. We've kind of, I think there's still room for improvement, but in terms of the ability of the software to change more rapidly, to change our rules, to change our process flows, to change our data models, it's actually ahead of where the people behind the process are. And the people now are becoming the bottleneck in terms of our ability to change. So that's why social as a focus has become so important, right? And people, for better or worse, you can't just change the rules in their head. You can't just give them a new flow chart and say, do this, right? You've got to engage them, you've got to empower them, and you've got to give them space for emergence to happen. So we're going to talk about how we do that. So if you think about this in terms of BPM, the discipline, not the technology, BPM, the discipline, and some of the practices, some of the procedures, some of the methodology that we use around business process management as discipline. We have to augment them. We've got to maybe shift the focus a bit away from some of the tried and true methods you see over there on the left-hand side, things like process modeling, focus on process execution, upfront design. We get it all designed out before we launch the initiative or what have you, and this notion of linear or straight-through processes, which are always our fondest dream, to the realities of what social BPM helps us deal with. If we're going to do that, some new disciplines, some new practices you're going to need to master. One we're going to talk about in depth in this presentation is purpose modeling, right? Giving people a sense of purpose about why they're engaged in this process. Now, I'm betting that's not a first-class concern yet for most of your BPM efforts. If you're going to do social, it's going to become one. We also got to switch from, as I said, process execution into more people engagement. We'll talk about things like gamification that can help with that. From upfront design to emergent design, right? You saw on the previous slide that we're going from doing by design, doing things up front, the design is all done, to design by doing. Having the design emerge as we execute some of the process, and making sure we capture it and get agreement on it. One of my favorite examples of that, just to give you a concrete example, everybody knows Wikipedia does a great job of having nice encyclopedia-like entries covering almost everything in the world, from Pokemon to the presidency. But a lot of people don't realize that the entire governance structure behind Wikipedia was also emergent. When Jimbo Wales set it up, he only really had two rules. He had the NPOV, the neutral point of view, as a rule. All entries had to have a neutral point of view, as hard as that is for some of the entries. And two, he had kind of the no a-person rule. We don't like people that are jerks here at Wikipedia. Other than that, there were no rules. And you'd think, well, it's a social kind of approach to doing things. It's crowdsourcing and all that. They probably still have no rules. Wrong. You go to the Wikipedia editors pages and you look at the governance rules behind that, they have grown up an almost too massive set of governance rules about how to do editing, how to handle disputes. All of that was built by the participants as Wikipedia was actually operating. Absolutely fascinating. And I think we're seeing more of that in more mainstream organizations as well, and I'll share a couple of examples of that. So emergence. And last but not least, this switch from linear activities, as I call them, to cycles. And one cycle in particular, which we call the community collaboration cycle, or sometimes the mass collaboration cycle. Believe it or not, there actually is a structured process to social. A lot of people think that's an oxymoron, that, oh no, if it's social, it's, you got to do it any way people feel like doing it. True, there's lots of different ways to actually execute this cycle, but when I show you the cycle and the phases it goes through, I think you'll recognize that every successful social site that you've been a part of actually uses this cycle in one way, shape, or form. It can be used as a great diagnostic for understanding perhaps why some of your communities aren't producing the results you're looking for. So we'll talk about the collaboration cycle as well. Great. Now, I'm not going to belabor this slide. I mentioned up front, provide and pray does not work. It has about a 90% failure rate when it comes to social communities. Typically, it doesn't work for almost any kind of IT endeavor, but it's particularly true for social, right? Because it really is about people getting engaged. And you think this would be common sense, but when we come in to assist clients, I'd say about 90% of the time, it's because they've already begun a social initiative, they've bought some software, they've set it up, and nobody's coming. The tumbleweeds are just going through the community site, and they're asking, what did we do wrong? We set it up just like, Twitter or Facebook, whatever, and nobody seems to be coming. Surprise, surprise, especially for social, giving people a blank page does not work.